So, what is the NCAA Division II? Most basketball players think it's D1 or nothing, but that's not true. There's a middle ground called Division II, or D2. D2 is for players who are very good at basketball, but also care about their life outside of the gym. The NCAA calls this life in the balance. It means you play high-level sports, you get scholarship money, but the sport does not take up every single second of your day. In D1, basketball is like a full-time job. In D2, it's a big part of your life, but you still have time to be a student and a regular person. Today, we're going to look at how D2 works, how you get recruited, and if it's the right place for you. So, let's talk about the schools first. One of the best things about Division II is that they aren't these massive, overwhelming campuses. Most of them hover around 2,100 students, which is honestly a sweet spot. You're not just a number there. You actually get to know your professors and the people in your classes. Plus, it's a pretty even split between public and private schools, so you've got options. If you're worried about getting in, don't sweat it too much. D2 schools are generally pretty accessible. On average, they accept about 80% of applicants. But here's the real secret sauce of D2. Regional play. Since most of your games are against schools nearby, you aren't stuck on a plane crossing 3 time zones every Tuesday. You're usually just hopping on a bus for a few hours. Because the trips are short, you aren't constantly missing class or falling behind. Most of the time, you can play your game and still be back in your own bed that night. It makes a huge difference when you're trying to keep your grades up and, actually stay well rested. Look, don't let the Division II label fool you. These coaches are still hunting for elite athletes. You've got to be fast, strong, and seriously skilled. Honestly, the bar is set almost as high as D1, maybe just a hair lower. If you're looking at height, here's the baseline for what coaches are scouting. Point guards usually need to be at least 5'7". Shooting guards should be 5'8" or up. Small forwards are ideally around 5'10", while power forwards usually land at 5'11". And if you're playing center, you've got to be at least 6 feet tall. Now, let's talk about your actual production on the court. To really get on a D2 radar, you should be averaging between 8 and 10 points a game in high school. But they aren't just looking for scorers. They want to see you chipping in about 3 assists and 5 rebounds too. You also need to prove you can shoot. If you aren't hitting at least 30% of your threes, it's gonna be a tough sell. The big thing coaches obsess over is efficiency. That's really just a fancy way of asking, are you actually making the shots you take? If you're playing on the wing, they want to see you hitting about half your shots. If you're working near the hoop, that number needs to be even higher, around 55%. Coaches aren't just looking for guys who can put up points. They want players who don't waste possessions. Look, you could be the absolute best player on the floor, but if your grades are a wreck, you aren't going anywhere. The NCAA is actually pretty strict about this. You've got to knock out those 16 core courses in high school, which is just the standard stuff like English, math, and science. The baseline you're aiming for is a 2.2 GPA. If you hit that, you're what they call a qualifier, meaning you can lace up and start playing the second you get to campus. But if you want some real advice, don't just settle for that 2.2. You really should be shooting for a 2.8 or higher. Trust me, it makes a huge difference when coaches are looking at you. And honestly, it's not just about being a good student for the sake of it, it's actually about the money. In D2, there's this huge game changer called academic stacking. Think of it like this. You've basically got 2 different piles of cash. First, there's the academic pile. That's money the school hands you just because your grades are solid. Then you've got the athletic pile. That's what the coach gives you because you're a beast on the court. Coaches absolutely love this because it helps them stretch their recruiting budget. They can take whatever athletic money they have left, stack it right on top of your academic scholarship, and suddenly you've got yourself a full ride. Basically, being smart makes you cheaper for the coach to bring on board, and when you're easier on their wallet, you become a way more attractive prospect. So here's the deal with the money. D2 handles things a bit differently than D1. In D1, it's usually all or nothing. You either get the whole thing paid for or you're paying your own way. But D2 uses what they call a partial scholarship model. Basically, the coach gets a pool of money and has to figure out how to split it up among the whole team. It's actually pretty rare for a D2 player to get a 100% free ride just for basketball. Instead, you're usually looking at a puzzle approach to pay for school. The basketball piece, you get a chunk of that athletic pool. The academic piece, you use those good grades we talked about to snag some academic grants. The need-based piece, if your family needs a little extra help, you might qualify for need-based money too. When you stack all those pieces together, it can absolutely cover the entire cost of college. But you have to be ready to put in the work. If your GPA slips, that academic piece of the puzzle disappears, and suddenly you're left with a bill to pay. One thing you'll notice is that D2 recruiting actually gives you a bit more breathing room than D1. It starts a little later, which is honestly a blessing because it gives you that extra time to really develop your game and sharpen your skills before the pressure kicks in. The date you really need to circle on your calendar is June 15th, right after you wrap up your sophomore year. That's when the floodgates open. Before that, coaches' hands are tied, but once that date hits, they can finally blow up your phone with calls, texts, and emails. They can even put a scholarship offer on the table right then and there. Then, once August 1st rolls around before your junior year starts, you're eligible for official visits. This is the fun part. The school actually picks up the tab for you to come check out the campus. We're talking paid for travel, food, and a place to stay while you get a real feel for the program and the team. The NCAA actually has some pretty strict rules about how much time you can spend in the gym. They want to make sure you aren't just a basketball machine. You actually need time for your homework and, a social life. When the season is in full swing, you're capped at 20 hours of basketball stuff per week. That includes everything: practice, film sessions, and the weight room. They also put a lid on the daily grind. You can't be out there for more than 4 hours in a single day. One of the best rules, honestly, is the mandatory day off. Once a week, the coach has to give you a full 24 hours away from the game. No practice, no film, no weights, just a day to actually rest and recharge. Once the season ends and you hit the spring, things dial back significantly. You're looking at only 8 hours a week, and most of that is just hitting the weights or doing some conditioning to stay in shape. Plus, you get 2 full days off every week during this time. This schedule is a total game changer if you're looking at a tough major like nursing or engineering. In D1, trying to balance those kinds of classes with the travel and practice schedule is a massive uphill battle. Sometimes it's almost impossible. But in D2, the schedule is actually built with that balance in mind. You can go after a serious degree and still play at a high level without having to choose one over the other. So at the end of the day, is Division II actually the right move for you? It's a great fit if you want to play at a seriously high level. And yeah, get a good chunk of your school paid for while you're at it. It's for the player who wants to win games, but also wants the freedom to, say, join a club on campus, or actually have the time to study for a big exam without feeling totally overwhelmed. If you're looking for that balance, getting a solid degree without coming out the other side with a mountain of debt, D2 is a fantastic choice. You get the best of both worlds. You're a standout on the court, but you're also a real student in the classroom. You've got to be real with yourself. Sit down and take a hard look at your height and those season stats. If you're hitting the benchmarks we've been talking about, don't just sit by the phone waiting for it to ring. You need to be the one making the first move. Get your name in front of those D2 coaches today. Trust me, they are out there looking for players exactly like you. You just have to make sure they know you exist. Sometimes the best place to be is right there in the middle. It's nice to know that there is a place where you really can have it all.